Alright, you guys. So the Final Fantasy VII remake process has been such a project, and I feel like there's a lot of arguments, debates whether or not the project is a success, whether or not this has been worth it, whether or not breaking one game, one legendary, iconic game, Final Fantasy VII, and turning to three different parts was a smart decision on Square Enix's part. And after I played and beat Final Fantasy VII Remake, I was very, very excited for what this project could accomplish and what I was hoping it would accomplish. As we played through Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and beat that game, I can't help but feel confused, and not confused narratively necessarily or game, or like I'm not like I'm confused more so about who this remake is for. What is the purpose of this? And obviously there's the financial side of, Square Enix trying to milk, their strongest game that they've ever created, arguably. So in this review video, whatever, I want to talk about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, my thoughts on the game overall, the narrative, and just where I think it puts Square Enix with the remake process. This review will most likely contain some type of spoiler, whether it's in the footage or whether it's something I talk about or feel relevant to talk about. So just kind of fair warning, if you haven't played Final Fantasy VII Remake or Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, you probably shouldn't watch this video unless you just don't care about spoilers. But anyways, before we get into the video, do me a favor, you guys, like, subscribe, let me know down below your guys' thoughts on this whole project and what Square Enix is doing with Final Fantasy VII. Cool. So without all that out of the way, or with all that out of the way, I do want to talk about one, I guess, preface before we get into Final Fantasy VII Rebirth as a game, and that's my history with Final Fantasy, my history with Final Fantasy VII, etc. So Final Fantasy as a franchise is my favorite franchise in like video games and probably most medias. Like Final Fantasy is something that I've been attached to since I was a child. Um, Characters like Cloud and Sephiroth, etc., are characters that I've known about since probably before I knew about characters like Mickey Mouse. Like that's how long I've known Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy VII is a game that I grew up, pretty much grown up with. My brothers absolutely loved Final Fantasy VII. I grew up watching them play it. When I played it, I had my thoughts on it. It's definitely a good game. Obviously, objectively, it's a great game. Amazing narrative, cool characters. I was never like a huge fanboy for Final Fantasy VII. I kind of grew up with like Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy 12, like that era, like PS2 more so era. And even as I kind of like played through the entire franchise, Final Fantasy VII was never my Final Fantasy per se. Cloud Strife was not a character that I necessarily thought was my favorite. With that being said, it's objectively an iconic, legendary game, and I understand, I guess, the protection that the fan base has over the original PS1 classic, right? So when we left Remake, we left with pretty much an almost like tried and true, very detailed version of the Midgar segment of the original Final Fantasy VII game, right? Like it was essentially that Midgar portion stretched out into like a 30-hour, action RPG that was super detailed, kind of dove deeper into a lot of the characters like Jesse and Biggs and Wedge. You kind of dove deeper into what Midgar is as a city, who the people of Shinra are, etc. So it was really cool to see the like minute details that they were able to do by dragging out that segment. And then you get left with a very, very strange cliffhanger. Like it was very adamant by the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake that this game wasn't necessarily just a remake of Final Fantasy VII. This is more of a reimagining, a retelling, almost even like chronologically the next installment in the Final Fantasy VII franchise as a whole. So if you guys aren't familiar with Final Fantasy VII as a franchise, separate from the game, there's the game. They have Advent Children. They have Dirge of Cerberus. They have Crisis Core. So there's different games in the lineage in the specific franchise that is Final Fantasy VII. And the way when I walked away from Final Fantasy VII Remake, again, I kind of walked away as this is something that takes place after the events more so, and like kind of like a rewinding of time. I guess that's kind of how I understood it, right? I didn't really watch videos of people explaining it. I played the game and that's what I walked away with. That's what I kind of took from this. Is this is Sephiroth essentially trying to find ways to, you know, mess with the fabric of time, mess with what's going on and what we know it. And in doing so, it allows us to kind of play this game with a sense of something always feels off kiltered. For anyone who's ever played Final Fantasy 7, when you play Final Fantasy 7 Remake, it's definitely a lot of the same steps, but something feels off. Something feels like you're not playing the same game, right? So when you get to Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, it's that times a million, in my opinion. It's a lot of minute details into a world that we're familiar with, into a world that I know very well, characters I know very well. Characters get added, NPCs get added, you know, missions and objectives get added, everything gets like more fleshed out. But in doing so, I end up being more lost sometimes. Not because I guess I don't understand. I mean, maybe I don't understand, but in my opinion, I think I understand it very well. But I'm lost in like, who is this for? I like, as someone who's played the franchise, there's definitely a lot of call outs to, you know, things that I know, but there's definitely a lot of things that feel like they're meant for newcomers. And it kind of feels like Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth straddles this line, or tries to balance this very, very thin, loose line of people who've played Final Fantasy 7 before and people who are new to the franchise. And I find that makes it confusing when they try to have narrative points that are either blatantly obvious for an OG fan, right? If you know, there's moments and segments where the characters talk that are very hinting at, like, wink wink, like, you know this, you know these characters, you know this, right? Like the first time you meet Sid, and he kind of just talks about how he met Aerith and he met Aerith's mom and stuff like that. So it's one of those type of things that it's like, these are very, very aimed at OG fans of Final Fantasy 7, right? People who know the lore, people who know the characters and know this game. There's all these moments that are for us, and like, for someone who's you know, in the mix, who understands this, it makes sense to me. I understand all these winks, but for a game that's trying to also welcome in a bunch of newcomers, right? These moments, I'm concerned about how they would handle a lot of these moments, because these moments aren't like off side missions, go off the beaten path and you get rewarded with extra. No. A lot of these are, you know, main storyline, objective, main cutscenes that are important pieces of the narrative. And again, as someone who's familiar with all media, from, you know, Crisis Core to Advent Children, etc., I understand all these nods to other, you know, parts of this story. But if I was brand new to this, I don't, like, how can I fall in love with these characters when it's clear that I'm not in on the conversation of a lot that's going on, or missing a lot of context. And I think that's where Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth struggles the most, is not really understanding who it wants to cater to. You know, obviously the gameplay style and this open world are, you know, hoping to grab a newer audience, or else we would have just redid the old story, right? They would have just did the old story in the same exact gameplay style, and that would have been Final Fantasy 7 Remake. I think every fan of Final Fantasy 7, the original, would have loved just the original game remade in the exact same, you know, turn-based gameplay style, and they would have been happy. But they went a step further of reimagining everything, the combat style, the world, the characters, everything, and hopes of, you know, growing the fan base. And I think that's a smart decision. I'd be super down for that. But when you make a lot of these, you know, main points of the game directed towards a fan base that's been here since '97, then you're completely missing the mark with what this whole project was for. I think so. At least that's how I gathered. Obviously, there's a financial reason why you would want to break this up in 3 parts. But the second, you know, positive is making Final Fantasy 7 this franchise that already stands so strong by itself, you know, and you're casting a wider net to introduce a bigger fan base into this. And that's a cool idea. But then why are you hinting at things that the audience should know already when they don't? Because most of them, a lot of them are newcomers, and that's, so I think that's where Final Fantasy VII Rebirth struggles a lot as far as its narrative for me is I just struggle to understand who this narrative's for, why it is told this way. And don't get me wrong, I guess again, as a lifelong fan of Final Fantasy VII in general, I get, the butterflies every time I see these moments. Every time I see, Yuffie mention someone that she had met in the past when she was a kid. Whenever you see these moments, it's like that's dope. That's cool. Whenever Cloud mentions Zack, and as an audience member, you know what's going on, and it makes things hit so much harder. But I'm worried that if I wasn't already in the mix, I don't think any of these narrative beats would have hit hard at all. I think they would just be like it would feel like walking into a room middle of a conversation and not knowing what's going on and trying to understand what's going on. You're consistently playing catch up, and that I can imagine does not feel good for someone who's not, in the conversation. Anyways, overall though, as someone who's been a fan of this, I do like a lot of the narrative points. I do like a lot of the things that this game is doing narratively with a lot of the characters and making me, reintroduce me to these characters that I've known for forever and I've seen them throughout all different medias, and it's just one of those type of things that for lifelong fans were rewarded heavily for being around since the beginning, and that is a good feeling to have. So I can't, I guess, get mad about it because it is good. It's really good. It's amazing. It's just, man, you're cutting off a lot of the fan base or what could be potential fans in the direction that you're taking. If we were to talk about the gameplay of the gameplay is amazing, right? The action combat I think is really good. Uh, I think everyone has sung this game praises for its combat style. I think that's like it's definitely really fun, really engaging. I do sometimes miss regular turn-based though. I'm gonna be honest with you. Like, and again, I'm very pro Final Fantasy taking this approach of changing its style game after game. Like, I'm a person I love Final Fantasy 16 combat. I love Final Fantasy 15. I love all these different combat styles. Something though about this mixed hybrid, I don't know. It feels like they really want to do turn based, but they're scared that turn based wouldn't attract the fan base that they want. At least that's how I kind of take it as. I still like what's going on. I still love it all. It's still very engaging and dynamic. There's just moments that I guess I felt like it's still at its heart a turn based game, and I feel like if they just did turn based, then it would make it easier for me as someone who's in love with turn based. But I like turn based, and I understand that they're trying to attract a wider audience of people who are probably more looking for something less stagnant. So overall, like, the combat system is really cool. It's really great. I don't think the materia system hits as strong in the Final Fantasy VII like overall remake project as I don't think it hits as well as it did in the OG games. I think the materia system was one of the most unique things Final Fantasy VII had, and the ability to kind of augment your characters in different ways, made it stand out from like a traditional job system or a traditional like white mage, black mage, etc. type style of that Final Fantasy was up until that point for the most part. And I think the materia system, I don't know, gets kind of watered down in the remake system. So like, I guess I just don't know how much, like, I guess I cared about my materia in this game as much as I did in the OG game. So I'm kind of curious about like why continue heavily, except for the fact that it's part of the branding of Final Fantasy VII, right? The materia system is part of the brand of what Final Fantasy VII is. It's a important part of a lot of characters like Yuffie, etc. Materia is an important part of the world, so I understand the purpose of, like, obviously we need materia in the game. I guess I just hope that for the finale of this game, they find ways to make the materia system more impactful to how I play this game. Because how I play this game right now, it almost doesn't really matter what material I have. I kind of just play this game however I want to play this game. And yes, I could do things like augment like HP boosts and like defense ups and stuff like that. But overall, like, I just feel like it's less impactful as it was in the original. Um, there's a lot of conversation about the padding of this game, and yeah, this game is padded to all hell. There's so much that can get taken out of this game to make it a smoother experience, a more frictionless experience. Um, there's stupid things like, you know, press X while you're sucking up like with a vacuum, and or you when you're the whole segment with Kate Sith. I'm gonna be honest, was very annoying, and I like Kate Sith, and I like what they did with Kate Sith in this game. But the whole playing as him, that whole segment was so annoying. I kind of wish it was over with so much quicker. Um, I think there's discrepancies in the length of chapters. There's certain chapters that I fly by, and other chapters that are stretched out. So there's definitely a pacing issue with this game. Like, I don't feel like it's ever paced properly. As far as the way the game looks, like a lot of people have already critiqued the whole Vaseline style of it, and I think they've done their best to kind of fix it. There's still moments, at least when I'm playing on base PS5, so I'm not playing on PS5 Pro, so maybe that's way better. But there are still moments where um, it looks pretty ugly sometimes. But it is what it is. Like, I'm not gonna knock that because generally I don't really care about it as much. The music in this game is outstanding. It's Final Fantasy VII, you know, blasted on steroids. Final Fantasy VII music is one of the best soundtracks in all of gaming, and hearing those moments, hearing those song beats, definitely drives home all the nostalgia. Right, this game plays so heavily on nostalgia, and that's as someone who's in love with nostalgia all the time, and it just hits me heavy. Like, I love the soundtrack of this game and the way the remixes are done, and a lot of the new reimagined versions of the OG soundtrack. It's really cool, and I love that. The battle system hits hard every single time. Every time I enter the open world and like the overworld theme song plays, it's amazing. Um, so I think ultimately there's a lot of really cool moments in this game, especially for me who's been here for forever. One of my favorite parts of this game is just kind of like the more you the more you get closer towards the end, and they start doubling down on, hey, if you made it this far, you're probably a fan for since forever at this point. They start to double down on a lot of the character moments. There's a specific moment with like the Turks where you're fighting Elena, and she kind of just, as a character, like Elena was never a character that I really cared about. But in that fight scene with her, and she kind of just doubled down. She's like, "No, I'm a badass," and like she, you know, puts up a fight, and like that's such a cool scene to see. It's a way to elevate a character that I never really paid too much attention to in the original games, but it elevates them to a character that I really like to see now. And every time I engage with the Turks, it's just always really cool. And when Reno comes back, it's just like, oh my god, like I can't believe we went through this entire game without Reno. It's crazy. Just all those moments and like callbacks to a lot of these characters that find ways to make me fall in love with characters that I'm already in love with, because I've played since I was forever. So it's just one of those games that I understand it gets a lot of hate because, and I guess at least from uh from someone who known this game for forever, who's known this franchise forever, I understand the hate as people who aren't hyper nostalgic for Final Fantasy 7 playing this game because it's supposed to be one of those games, right? Like, there's certain games in the history of gaming that are held to levels that other games wish they could be, and Final Fantasy 7 is one of them. So this whole remake process has been like kind of like you need to be a part of this, right? Whether you're a fan or not of the original, you need to be a part of this in some way, shape, or form. But I don't think I'd ever tell someone to play Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth without playing Final Fantasy 7 the original, and like maybe even play Crisis Core as well, and like maybe even a little bit of Dirge of Cerberus, just to kind of throw that in. And if you didn't grow up playing Final Fantasy 7, that is a hard game to go back to and play, I think. If you try to play Crisis Core, that is a hard game to go back to, I think. Dirge of Cerberus is pretty trash, so I don't think anyone should really ever play that game. So it's kind of like to say, hey, before you play this game, you should have at least bare minimum have played the original Final Fantasy 7, and then play Final Fantasy 7 Remake, and then get into this game. That's a lot of ask, I think, that Square Enix is doing. And I guess it's just one of those type of things, like I wonder financially kind of what's the point. except for the fact that you're paying homage to one of the greatest games of all time. But from a financial standpoint, what they could have done, I think they lost a lot of potential of finding an easier way to reintroduce this game to a wider audience. And I think and I think from the outside looking in, if I was, in the headspace of Square Enix, that's what I think they were trying to do and just missed the mark. And instead of, trying to open up the net for new fans, they just doubled down under OG fans. And as an OG fan, don't get me wrong, it feels amazing. If you've played Final Fantasy VII and you're very familiar with the franchise, and the more you've invested in this world, the more payoff Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is for you, in my opinion. And I think it's the most obvious in like pretty much the last couple chapters when they're tiptoeing around the death of obviously the character that dies, and they're just tiptoeing around that, and there's just kind of like, will they do it, will they won't do it type of energy, and how are they going to do it, and how is it going to play out. And it just, what happens, controversial or not, and I'm a fan of the ending. I know a lot of people didn't like the ending. I like the ending. um but again, it just leaves us in a weirder place. If I play Final Fantasy 7 remake and that already leaves us in a weird place, again, if I was a newcomer, and then you play Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth and that leaves you in a weirder place as a newcomer, I don't understand where, like, what type of audience they expect to sell this to except the OGs. And that's fine, but even then, a lot of OGs are going to get turned off because they like turn-based. They love the deep materia system that game had. They love that you can play and beat that game in 30 hours, right? Instead of dragging that out to 30 hours and then 60 hours, and then who knows how long the next game is going to be, right? So in total, it's like, Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, I think, is a great game. I'm confused about who it's for, I guess is how I want to leave it off. Can I recommend it to people? Probably not, unless you've played Final Fantasy 7, unless you understand that, and even then, it's asking a lot for you to get into this game. As someone, I think, who personally hits every check mark that this game would ask of you to have, yeah, I think it's a great game. I think it's amazing. I love my time with it. But again, with all those caveats, if you don't hit every caveat, I don't think this is a good game. And I understand why people hate it, and I understand why people probably put this game down, and why the finale of this storyline is probably gonna sell astronomically less than Final Fantasy 7 Remake did, and that sucks. And I wish Square Enix, I hope at least Square Enix takes notes from this, and if they do try to remake any other games like Final Fantasy 9 or Final Fantasy 10, I think they do it in a way that's a lot more seamless, a lot more frictionless, and can help grow the fan base instead of separate the fans, in my opinion. Anyways, you guys, I might leave the video there. If you guys, again, let me know you guys' thoughts down below, and I'll see you guys on the next one.